Today we have EJ LeBlanc joining us. EJ is the founder of CALDO Consulting, and their focus is working with DevOps oriented learning organizations to support communications and learning professionals as they strive to be valuable business partners across value streams. He has held numerous positions as human learning and performance architect and instructional systems designer. EJ holds certifications in Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, cost control account management, and a credential in architecture and systems engineering, models and methods to manage complex systems. He holds a Master's of Science in Instructional Design and Executive Chief Learning Officer Graduate Certificate in Business from George Mason University. We are grateful to have him presenting for us today. EJ, thank you for your time. You may begin.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I see that we have veterans here today, and I'm grateful for the smaller audience because this is still a nascent idea, and I invite you to poke holes in it. So as we go on, for the presentation, I've got a lot to cover, so please don't interrupt while I'm going through it. However, if you do see something, I encourage you to write down a note. And if you don't feel like blasting me in front of everyone, feel free to say, hey, on slide this, did you think about this? Or, but I'm essentially encouraging at every level your feedback and soliciting it. It is both desired and eagerly desired. So I am a human learning performance architect. I've started my career working with U.S. Navy as a sonar technician for submarines, became an English teacher, got my first instructional design gig working with SAIC for the Center for Domestic Preparedness, and then very quickly shifted over to work for the U.S. Coast Guard and became a performance analyst, ADL specialist, and a lead multimedia developer, and then became a senior training specialist for FINRA, working with the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And then I've also worked with Lockheed Martin, both as a senior technical writer and as a training lead. And throughout that whole time, starting in 2010, I started a side gig, my own business. And I've done everything from making websites to all sorts of different e-learning experiences, all sorts of instructor-led training, lots and lots of different performance solutions. And I have enterprise architecture on there. Don't hire me for that. But essentially, that's one of the things that led me to a lot, as we'll find out in this presentation, a lot of what I've been working on lately and the need to set up the communications and learning for DevOps framework and how that will benefit communications and learning professionals. That particular journey started whenever I was working with the US Air Force. I made what you're seeing in front of you as an interactive infographic working as EJ LeBlanc LLC under CSRA for the Air Force's Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Program. And essentially, this was a demo to show, hey, imagine that you're a general and you could see all of the different units and all of the, that you could go and see how they were, not only what the unit was like, but what the unit was used for. And ideally, you would even see it within the operational context, right? And so it essentially would show them, like I made this infographic that you see here, and wanted the general to be able to see this is what it's capable of doing. This is how it's able to do it. And but what if, the technology is being updated all the time? What if that gets updated? How do I continually update that? Furthermore, that graphic that you just saw here, this was originally created to be a first draft of essentially creating what was called an OV1, or an operational view 1, which was, I've discovered, an essential part of the Department of Defense architectural framework. So I went around and asked people, what is DODAF and what is this? And the Air Force used, not only the Air Force, but the US military used that particular framework to represent its enterprise architecture. And so I took a course on enterprise architecture, bought a copy of Spark's Enterprise Architect, started delving into unified modeling language and the systems modeling language, or SysML and UML. And from there, I really knew I was onto something, because I felt that if we could find that source of truth that model-based systems engineering is founded upon, and if, as is I'm sure you might be able to relate, by and large, training is but an afterthought, if it's lucky. And a lot of these organizations, especially whenever they're building a new system, and I wanted to see if we could be part of that source of truth and one of the stakeholders that as part of that. And so whenever I was taking that MBSE course from, it's just a MIT professional certificate that they offer, you could still be part of the systems architecture and model-based systems engineering course. It's still available today. I saw immediately that what they were calling a functional flow block diagram was very reminiscent of the Dick and Terry model for designing instruction. And I realized right off the bat that this is what they called traditional systems engineering, or document-based systems engineering. And I don't know about you, but I haven't done a formal front-end analysis in quite some time. In fact, I went through my previous work. On the left here, you see whenever I was going to a master's at University of South Alabama, I made, because I too was an English teacher, Bob. But whenever I was going through that process, I saw, using the Dick and Terry model to make instruction. Here was my goal analysis that I did on the left, with my analysis of prerequisite skills on the bottom. And I saw right away, hey, there's a functional flow block diagram, and it's almost one for one exactly how it's being used. And so today, we know that traditional methods such as doing those front-end analyses work. Anywhere from 9 to 12% of a project can be expected to be spent on doing that front-end analysis. It gets expensive the more involved the project is. And they work until they don't. So I was working, as I mentioned earlier, as a technical writer and lead instructional systems designer and developer, a lead training specialist, I was lead of the ISIS the Integrated Submarine Imaging System team. And we were dealing with all kinds of shifting schedules, crushing technical debt. We were using systems that were outdated 10, 15 years ago, and we are still using them today. The source documents would change. I remember quite clearly, I was in the lab, essentially chilling, exploring something new, and I would get up and just so happen to walk by these two people who were having this conversation that I knew would directly impact me. And I said, and yes, please feel free to use the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that as well. But I felt, I just so happened to overhear them and realized right off the bat, man, this is going to have massive implications. Went and told the technical writing team. I would have to go back and redo hundreds of PowerPoint slides based off of that change that I just so happened to hear. And oh, by the way, that whole project was due the next day. So massive implications. And why weren't they telling us about them? So it's a whole massive involvement that doesn't work, because I can't go do a formal FEA. By the time I even begin the FEA, it's already outdated by the time I'm even coming close to reaching any type of conclusions and recommendations that the design team could use. So we're not alone in this. This is from, I attended the Lean and Six Sigma conference in 2021 from the American Society for Quality. And here's what another gentleman had to say about these same problems.
The key challenges, and Paul mentioned and touched on some of these, is that the time to results are usually slow. The cost is high. It's really hard to take a look at all of your transactions just because of the volume of data. Sometimes it requires heavy technical skill sets for analysis that not all users may have. And then the business cases are created with a high number of assumptions, and then the monitoring is manual, time-consuming, and retroactive.
So what GoldRat, Elihu GoldRat, in the book Beyond the Phoenix Project, he says that in any flow of work, there's a direction of flow, but there's one and only one bottleneck. And any improvement not made at the bottleneck is an illusion. So here we are, and he says it another way as well. If you're making improvements at a non-bottleneck, it doesn't make the system one bit more productive. The time and money saved is an illusion. That has profound implications. And so we and the human learning and performance community have been talking about, well, should I call myself an instructional systems designer, an instructional designer, a learning experience designer, or hey, a learning engineer? And I'm here to tell you, or even if we modify and become as efficient as possible using the current processes and methods today in our own isolated community, it is an illusion. The performance that we create is nothing but an illusion. Because if we improve our inputs, processes, and outputs to deliver more content to our customers faster, that will only leave our learning and performance team starved for work. People will be wondering, well, if you get everything done so fast, what are we paying you for? Why are you just sitting around? If we improve the supplier side, they're giving us more work, which is clearly what we're experiencing today. There is nothing but this enormous amount of work that builds up. And so classical systems approaches, you would have a bunch of systems engineers working in a room, all working with that classical systems engineering method. And this was very effective. They were able to go through step by step, task by task, task by subtask, goal by sub goal, and map out exactly what was happening. And so the model that they used then was called the V model. And it's heavily document based, and it uses a linear waterfall approach. And And so I'm not alone in saying this. You don't have to take my word for it on how classical instructional methods were based off of classical systems engineering methods.
Okay. So how did you, tell me a little bit about how did you arrive to setting up the 5 stages? What was the idea behind that?
Oh, the 5 phases are the basically derived from the systems engineering regulation. Okay. It's a standard approach in systems engineering to have those 5 phases used in everything from the auto industry to satellite building to whatever.
Okay.
So what does that mean for us? It means that we're still using, by and large, old methods and techniques that are not in alignment with the industry of systems engineering, which has improved by leaps and bounds over the past 60 years. In fact, I would argue since 2010, since the beginning of the 4th Industrial Revolution, the convergence of multiple technologies and processes have completely revamped the ball game. And so what are modern systems engineers doing? Well, they're using UML, entity relationship diagrams, systems modeling languages, and well, they're creating models of the system to essentially create digital twins of whatever that system and that process is. And so this leads us to DevOps. And I believe that DevOps is the ultimate synthesis of, to date, or it might even be penultimate in just a little bit, who knows. But I believe that DevOps is the synthesis of all of these things that we're seeing as a result of Industry 4.0. And Donovan Brown, Microsoft Partner Program Manager, and certainly a DevOps expert, has defined DevOps as a union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And DevOps was originally called DevOps because you had software development and IT operations butting heads, just like you read about in the Phoenix project and the Unicorn project. And they were butting heads. And how in the world did they get to work together? Well, they use lean manufacturing principles, lean and Six Sigma manufacturing principles, in order to create this new and improved flow of work. And what do you know? People that are using DevOps are able to outperform their peers by leaps and bounds. They're exponentially better at delivering value to the customer. That's why Amazon is able to update its website over 20,000 times a day. But what does that mean for us? So for us, the three ways, let me go on to more about about DevOps and some fundamental principles of it. There are three fundamental ways of DevOps. The first way is flow, or what Peter Senge would call a profound appreciation of the system. And that's taking from raw inputs to delivery of the value to the customer. And then the second way is feedback, where through Senge's free exchange of ideas, you're able to, at each work center along the value stream or along that direction of flow, to provide feedback to the people that perceive them. How's this work center doing? Hey, these are the things that we need in order to help work flow through our center. What can you do to help us out? And so with that feedback and the psychological safety that provides, you're able to create and facilitate the third way. And this is where we as human learning and performance professionals come in, a culture of continuous learning and experimentation. And like Guy Wallace recently posted, a bunch of content built or bought does not a learning organization make. So we're not talking about building a new e-learning course. We're talking about partnering with the organization to make sure that people are able to do their jobs. And so in the Phoenix project, it says, we started restoring sanity when we figured out what our constraint was. Then we protected it, making sure that the time on the constraint was never wasted. And we did everything to make sure work flowed through it. So, does anyone feel constrained? Does anyone feel overwhelmed with this new system updates all the time? I know I do. And it's like you're seeing unrelenting information tsunamis. And those information tsunamis are not going to stop. It's only going to get worse. It's as artificial intelligence and the things that Donald Clark is writing about for the learning community, as all of these other technologies come and automate these things, what will we do? What will these learning professionals and performance improvement professionals be doing? So we can't fight the waves. If we fight those waves of information, we will be destroyed. Our profession, instructional systems design, really is dead. But again, it works, but it's not working now. It's because by and large, we're fighting and we're not addressing these root causes. So on the right here, you see, I took a Pluralsight course by Richard Seroter, and in it, he has this beautiful graphic for the DevOps tool chain. And he talks about what's essentially, if you go from the bottom to the end here, this is essentially analysis, this is development, this is the implementation, and this is the evaluation of the DevOps process. And then what do you know? Is there anything that's, familiar for us? Well, communication and knowledge sharing. Is there anyone here that's responsible for knowledge management? Of course, that's our jobs. That's what we do. And so we have this golden opportunity to partner with DevOps-oriented people and use the experience of decades that the International Society of Performance Improvement has built in order to partner with people and provide value by enabling them to go with the flow. Because we understand what true learning is, and we understand the components of Senge's learning organization. That's our primary value proposition. We could help people learn and create a true learning organization where people are psychologically safe. And so, to quote Andrew Schaefer, you're either a learning organization or you're losing to someone who is. So again, we're again, from the course by Richard Schroeder. This is also found in Emily Freeman's book, DevOps for Dummies, which I found very informative. Let that say what it will. But whatever you're thinking about DevOps and you're wanting to get the high level picture of it, think of the 3 ways, and then think also, and remember to keep CALMS. And CALMS is an acronym that stands for culture, automation, lean, metrics, and sharing. And so that creating that continuous culture of experimentation and learning, using evidence-based practices, streamlining wherever possible, automating wherever possible, and only doing so because it's the core, like Donovan Brown says about the people, process, and the products. He says that the people is the most difficult part of DevOps. We know that. We've experienced that in any culture change effort. So what is the value stream and how do we partner with the flow? Well, you could do a simple SIPOC diagram. What are our suppliers? What are our inputs? What are our processes? What are our outputs? What are the who are the customers? And whenever you do so, you map out what the information flow is, what the material flow is, and you ideally have the lead time and the metrics to support how long it takes to do each one of the steps along in the processes of the value stream. And so what the problem is, though, is that if we're just focused on our shop, like we just said, work will build up at the front. If the suppliers are getting better and they're getting better at automation, we'll get more and more work. We're overwhelmed by the information tsunami. If we get so good and we pump out our content, but the next person down the block, they'll get overwhelmed, and we'll be sitting around waiting for people. And so all of these wastes that we're talking about can be hidden. And so if I'm handing off my work to another work center, that's one thing. But what if that work center, the other work center, is US Navy acquisitions? And what if I've got to hand off my material to their technical training and documentation teams within the constraints provided by contract management and legal? You know, your average contract manager takes 3 years to get proficient at their job because it's such an incredibly dense amount of information. The federal acquisitions regulations of the FAR is over 2,000 pages. And so that's a massive constraint on being able to acquire anything or being able to do anything with the government today. Executive leadership, how do they even know what's going on? Is what we're doing in alignment with what the strategic vision that they've established? And what if that first work center is a major military contractor, something like Lockheed Martin or Boeing and their teams? And then what if the US Navy acquisitions has to hand it off to the Fifth Fleet? Suddenly, the value stream consists of thousands upon thousands of people, and all of these constraints are, you're talking a massive amount of waste that can build up very quickly to be very, very costly. And so if we're able to automate the vast majority to the second that any one of these stakeholders updates the source of truth and the communications are automated, then what does that mean for us as learning professionals? It means that things change, our jobs change. Human communication professionals are those who capture and disseminate the single source of truth across the value stream, where one party, including amongst thousands and thousands of people, all the other parties are notified. And so who are human communication professionals? It's anyone that captures and disseminates a single source of truth. And it's anyone that does that. And so for learning professionals, our job completely shifts. We're no longer dropping didactic knowledge bombs on people to make sure that they're able to get the latest bit of knowledge. That's not our job. That's communications job. What our job is to certify that and support accomplishment-based job competency using evidence-based methods. So do the people know how to do their job? can we help them, do their job in as efficient and effective a manner as possible? And thus, you'll see some overlap here between the human learning professionals and the human communications professionals. And I'll show you this that shows that overlap here a little bit. You'll see that some of these are exactly the same people. But we'll be using the same tools and methods to ensure this person knows what they're doing. We have communicated the source of truth. Everyone's able to do that in real time. And so therefore, whenever I, as a learning professional, show up and all of my PowerPoint decks, hopefully we're not even using the current version of PowerPoint. We're using something that's part of this automated value stream. And all the content and all the methods are updated. And one of the examples I used in Lockheed Martin working with the ISIS team was, what if we were able to just show up and I said, hey, everyone, don your goggles, and everyone would don their goggles and we would actually use the system. And instead of any PowerPoints, we were actually using the system, using the actual process. And therefore, I was able to certify that by the end of that learning experience, this person really does know how to do that experience. Well, they say, well, that takes too much time. How do I do that? There's no way that you could show ROI. And this is so huge. This is such a massive thing. What in the world are you talking about? We're not going to be able to make these changes. Okay, start with one process and improve it, working with other people. And that's what the CALDO continuous process improvement cycle is for. Just like DMAIC, it's based off of DMAIC and the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles. You create intent, you determine your why, you get clarity on your identified gaps, and you work together collaboratively to determine potential paths forward. You assess your workflows, you identify, document, and measure at least one workflow of interest, and you capture the baseline and your desired performance. And then wherever possible, you look for feedback loops. And ideally that's automated, but you could just say, hey, email me here and create a feedback loop. I don't know how much instruction you've produced. I know I've produced a lot that has no opportunity for feedback to any of the parties that are involved. And that's a shame. You develop a culture of experimentation for the fourth part of this process. And ideally, at every step along the way, but especially here, you're wanting people, whenever you get that feedback, you're wanting people to feel safe. You're wanting to encourage resilience. You want people to be bold and take those risks to tell people difficult things. You conduct an experiment to test the alternative ideas. Whenever you get that feedback, it says, hey, what about this? You convert local discoveries into global improvements. In her book, Nicole Forsgren states that your average performance improvement can be applied in one part of the organization, could be applied to 75% of the rest of the organization. Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate it. Nope, he's already gone. And so observe and then finally observe and learn. First, you observe for intent-based leadership. This is based off of David Marcate's Turn the Ship Around. Certify technical knowledge and competence in the workflows. And everyone in the organization understands what the organization is about. And so you know that the communication is effective whenever everyone knows what the CEO is trying to achieve and what's the most important to the CEO. It's effective whenever the CEO knows what his people's biggest problems are and what he's doing to mitigate those problems. And then you celebrate successes, and you don't celebrate failure, but the results gleaned from those failures. And so all of this is loosely defined, and this actively encourages loosely coupled architectures. And so ideally, a CALDO mature organization would go through this process where first there's awareness. Then, as Karen Martin talks about in her book, metrics-based process mapping, people are able to map out the process. They know exactly how long the process takes. And then again, the great book by Karen Martin, Value Stream Mapping. You have an ideal knowledge of what the current and future state is for your value streams. And ideally, people start partnering across the silos. Marketing is now talking to the software team, and training is now able to leverage that multi-million-dollar marketing campaign and use the same materials and resources because we're talking to each other and talking about each other's needs. And then for the 5th and 6th levels, you partner across organizations because now your organization becomes another constraint because your suppliers also, because if you become so good at your work, but your suppliers don't, and your customers aren't able to even receive your product, whatever that is, waste builds up on either side. So it's not, you can't do anything in a vacuum across the board. In order to achieve organizational agility, you have to be, your organization has to partner with whoever your organization is serving. And that ultimately, if we have enough people doing exactly that, and the government is working with the industry in an automated fashion, to the second that this new compliant law comes up, or even better, Congress has, like the reason why the Library of Congress is across the way is because they need to be educated. They need to be able to see what the problems are. They need to make informed decisions. What if, because the data was available to them, they would understand what the impact of a law would be because the people were telling them this and providing the data to support that. That would enable, theoretically, ideally, to support societal agility and enable allies from across the world to support each other and provide each other exactly what they need when they need it. So I'd like to show you two tools today, one in more detail than the other because it's so amazing. And I gave a hint about it earlier, and we're good on time. So the first one is Abby, and the second one is the Microsoft Power Platform, specifically focused on Power Apps. And so in this particular use case that Abby presented at the conference I mentioned earlier, this enterprise had 32,000 patients and all sorts of different problems that were related to that. And it was over, this particular period of analysis was over 142 days. So Abby comes in, they're able to install their software through the core system processes. They're able to get the data of the process and put a numerical value of finance, a numerical financial value to exactly how long it takes to do each one of those processes. So here are all the results of that, and they have a dashboard where they could clearly see their current status. They're able to click on the in a moment and very easily see, I'll zoom in here a little bit, exactly what the timeline is and how each part of the process went. And then whenever they are able to select a particular process, they're able to see, oh, this, for that particular process, this was done at this time, this was done at this time. Again, automated, right? And so here, whenever you click on an individual one of those processes, here's what that looks like. And what do you know? You're able to see in real time what people are experiencing and where your builds up. Oh, hey, this is red. We got a problem here. Let's take a look at what's happening here. So, I find this is amazing. And okay, well, let me go ahead and look at these different processes and map out each one of those. And hey, I just want to go ahead and look at the following two things I want you to listen to in this part of the presentation. One is the actual content. And then the two, I want you to catch if there's a performance discrepancy and see if someone could use a human performance technologist to aid in this person's decision-making.
So now let's move on to the analysis aspect of this, of DMAIC. We've done the define, we've done the measuring, now let's do the analysis. So one of the things that we want to focus on is whether or not insurance verification was completed. So one of the steps that the health organization took was to say the policy is when the patient calls in, the scheduler is supposed to verify that patient's insurance. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a quick query, which is just a basic search, to say, give me all patient timelines that didn't have an insurance verification in that timeline. So where no insurance verification was done on that account. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on search. And what we're going to find is that almost 4,000 patient encounters, or 11% of our total patient volume, didn't have insurance verification done. And what we're going to see is all of these ended up in a denial. So for one reason or another, when we didn't verify patient's insurance, there was a denial at the back end. And what we know from our experience is that these denials cost us money. So what we just did is we identified a problem. Now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, well, what's the root cause of the problem? We know in the policy that the scheduler is supposed to be verifying this information. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say, well, who was the scheduler who made that appointment? And what we're going to find is that Earl Hughes, out of these 3,900 appointments where insurance wasn't verified, Earl Hughes was responsible for 1,500 of those, almost 40%. So what we now know is that the root cause is training for a user. And there's some other users that weren't following policy, like Deb Ford and Christy Jordan and Ruth and Marta, but Earl is really kind of the big culprit here. Earl is responsible for almost half of these accounts that didn't have insurance verification. So what we're going to do is we are going to focus in on Earl, and what we're going to see is we're going to focus on those 1,500 accounts that Earl touched where he didn't verify, or that he scheduled where he didn't verify that insurance. So let's just recap real quickly what we did. We found a problem, which is that insurance verification wasn't being done on these accounts, and that was leading to denials, which is something that we want to avoid. When we took a look at the root cause and who's responsible for those denials or for those missing verifications, what we found was there was a few users, but a good chunk of it was coming from Earl. So we're now focusing on Earl. Now the next step for us is to say, okay, well, if we were to improve Earl's behavior, if we somehow got Earl to do what he's supposed to be doing and following the policy of verifying that insurance at point of scheduling, what would that be worth to us as an organization? And what we can start to do is we can go and create a data-driven business case to say, what's going to happen to our costs? And what we're finding is that a denial cost, on average, costs $128 for the organization. And that's time that the back-end office has to spend reworking that denial, sending that new claim to the insurance company, doing the back and forth with that insurance company to get payment on that claim. But for these 1,500 appointments that were scheduled, there should be no denials, because if Earl had done the insurance verification, then we wouldn't have gotten a denial on the back end. So the cost for these denials should actually be zero. And what we're going to find is that if we go out and train Earl to do exactly what he was trained to do, which is verify that insurance at point of scheduling, we're going to save the organization $193,000 every 6 months. This is a 6-month data poll. So in a year, we're saving almost $400,000. So now let's move on to the analysis.
So what does that mean? It means that you used to take 12% of a project to figure out, take to figure out 9 to 12% of a project to do that type of front-end analysis. Now that's down to 1. We could do the analysis. We could use the old school methods that we know work. But the whole system has to be empowered to facilitate that. And tools like Abby are doing that through intelligent process automation. Did anyone catch the performance anomaly, if I were to call that, in what he was saying? Perhaps a jump to a particular conclusion that we might be familiar with. Yeah.
I think they were real quick to say the problem is training.
Yes, indeed.
It could be that guy's getting reinforced every time, he does the wrong thing and punished when he does the right.
Absolutely. Gold star. That is absolutely correct. And yet another example of how we could provide value to these organizations that are automating the technology. They need us more than ever.
They're so good on process, and they're so good on standards, and they're so good on lean. They're good on feedback, but they don't get guidance, and they don't get the consequences part of this stuff. And they're very quick to take anything that flows through and call it, operator error, and it needs training.
Right. I remember one going to, and in Lean Six Sigma speak, we call that going to the Gemma and actually talking to the people. What if you were, it could be anything from a million different problems, and you never know until you go talk to the person. So it's really good stuff. Microsoft Power Apps is available at most of our institutions that we work with. This particular, oh, I'm out of time. I'm going to wrap this up quickly. In this particular study that the, but anyway, the bottom line is that they found, I'm going to go ahead and click this link here and then share exactly that. Because I want to, anyway, if you look up the total economic impact of Power Apps, I believe it was Forrester. Forrester, of course, is the one that did the research for that. They were able to reduce the number of people writing up quotes from 2 to 1 in each shot because they made an application that took the manual information. Where I while working for the Coast Guard, I saw one particular performance evaluation of students where it was all handwritten, and they made a digital copy by scanning that into the computer, where you didn't even have optical character recognition on that. It didn't actually get any data that was usable whatsoever. So you had no idea how people were doing. And so here you have an example of someone going around to each and collecting paper forms and then manually inputting that data. With Power Apps, you're able to streamline a huge amount of the process, and it's been shown to be very, very effective. I'd like to spend more time talking about that, but unfortunately, I'm out of it. What I do know is that what a fully CALDO mature organization will look like is where government, industry regulations, and the laws that are created, the needs of society, market demands, I've got market demands in there twice, I need to fix that. And then the contract requirements, the organizational operations itself, and the customers would all be interconnected and would all be showing in real time what was going on and how they could updating that source of truth and enabling people like us to come in and certify that job competence was achieved or that the need is being met. And so if you zoom into that organization, everyone across that value stream, the second that any one of these parties and many others update the source of truth, all the parties across the value stream would see that happening in real time, inside and outside the organization where applicable. One of the things the Navy is working on right now, for instance, is comment to code in 24 hours. Right now, there's all of these walls of security that are preventing them from getting exactly the things that they're trying to achieve. And so ideally, a fully CALDO mature organization, all across the board, the second the government updates its laws, the second industry updates a regulation, all the parties across the board are informed about that. So questions and feedback, please provide that. Let me know what you think. Please also go to caldo.academy. Peter Perverso and I are working on a course specifically for this, talking about how the implications of this technology for learning and performance professionals here at the DC chapter. Any questions or comments? Yes, please, Steve.
Thanks for doing this. This is really mind-blowing. The difference between what's happening in DoD spaces and what happens in others is kind of big at times. I'm getting back to just, simpler things in my universe and how task analysis continues to be, a big time and money sink, and how people are still doing that, using single documents. And once those documents are created, they are then copied, pasted, and reformatted into all sorts of other deliverables. Are these tools now getting things set up so if we work together and do a task analysis, that task analysis can then appear in ways that inform job descriptions, in ways that inform training and competences, in ways that create job aids?
Not now, but that's the goal. That's
Okay.
what this framework is for. Right now, like I was saying, training is but an afterthought. And so the performance is but an afterthought. And so how do we build the frame? Well, I was at the ITSEC for 2019, and there various stakeholders presented the new concept of learning engineering, and it was really classical instructional systems design, right?
Yes.
Right. And but we're going to do it with more rigor, like classical instructional systems design. And
yeah, I'm hearing a lot of the same arguments, but I'm not seeing different approaches.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so one of the things that he said, one of the things that one of the members on the panel said was that what's missing is the framework. What's missing is the scaffolding to which we could build that type of information, and the language even to talk about it. I think that DevOps provides communications and learning professionals a golden opportunity to do exactly the kind of things that you're talking about. And human resources is definitely, if it's part of the value stream, we've got to get on the same boat. We've got to get on the same page. And we've got to get all of our partners on the same page. So thank you for that. It's really good.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for your presentation. I appreciate it, EJ. I have a little problems struggling with applying it, and really, from it just could be my lack of diving deep enough. The classical approach, I understand. One of the challenges I'm seeing is in the architecture of the framework is really what problem are you trying to solve? So something like the hospital insurance is very clear. That's easy. But I put together a new learning experience platform, over the last 2 years, and it's working with so many different platforms. And the platforms are changing on a regular basis. So it's almost like there's quicksand and moving tides are coming in and going. And so we don't have, it's really hard to nail down the environment we're working in. That's why, the design thinking approaches of saying, hey, let's just be nimble. Let's throw something out. Let's experiment. Let's incrementally add. And as we're incrementally adding, we're learning what the customers are needs. We're learning how all these different subsystems are working and all these different moving parts. So so that's where I'm kind of struggling a little bit. So we have a big problem that automation is creating, and I call it kind of a spaghetti mess. But it's not static. It's constantly, all these platforms are learning and evolving, and then everything talking to each other is really challenging.
I agree. And I think that, again, we need a framework to talk about these kinds of things and to avoid exactly the kinds of quagmires that you're discussing. And so for an individual person, we're not going to change the entire value stream. What can we do personally? And that's why, we've got to start when's the best time to plant a tree? I don't know if y'all have heard that one. Have y'all heard that one before? When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And when's the second best time to plant a tree? Well, right now. And so if we could start by creating a tent, making sure that our own workflows are assessed, creating opportunities for the feedback loops. And one of the things that Peter Perverso shared with me yesterday was, if you provide the opportunity for people. You provide the opportunity for people to be able to disagree, right? And without having a finger pointed at them and saying, this is all your fault. Nope. And if we don't have that, we're not ever able to develop a culture of experimentation and learning. And we can't do the develop that culture or even truly observe and learn, because if people are afraid to come to us to tell us what's going on, we don't know what's really going on. Does that help? Does that help with you know, and to start with one process, one small process, whatever that is. And is there anything I could do to help make even that more practical, Dirk?
Not for me, but it's just that the world is really complicated nowadays. It's not easy.
Agreed.
And in the past, you know, long time ago, and we had closed systems, and in closed systems, you can spend a lot of time doing the upfront analysis because everything's you have control over. Nowadays, you know, I even logged on, I was on my bank account and trying to connect two bank accounts. And I was at Chase, my big bank, and they had me log in directly into my other little bank that's out here in Southern Oregon. And it really surprised me how much integration, you know, this loosely coupled architecture, I guess is, you know, that's the world we're in, but it's really hard. How do you pull all that off? And is it a framework? That's where I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I think that an organization that is attempting to use, and so first of all, no one's used this yet, right? Like this is literally one of the first presentations that I've given on this. The second thing is the processes and the things that we're talking about are already happening.
Sure.
All I'm trying to do here is give communications and learning professionals a way to be part of the, because they need us, but they don't know it, right? They really do need us. They need your decades of experience in providing human learning and performance solutions. But how do we get on the same page? And how do we know what true DevOps is? And how do we know what automation? Because true DevOps is human friendly. True DevOps is creating the heart of DevOps, the heart of Agile is creating a learning organization. And we ought to be right there, jumping up and down, celebrating, because we want to have that. And we want to be part of that. And I think that if we were able to come to the table and have a framework for which enabled both of us to communicate our needs clearly, I don't think that we would be overwhelmed by the information tsunamis. I think that we'd definitely find ourselves able to embrace the same technology, because it's the automation that's creating this massive, it's this information tsunamis, right? It's these software itself, it's the dev and the ops itself that's creating these massive information tsunamis. I believe that we must partner with that and ride that wave. And if we're still manually building our processes and doing that type of controlled front-end analyses that you were referencing, it's going to be very difficult to add value. And it's going to be very stressful and not human friendly.
Yeah, well, it's a good first start. Where I'm not seeing, which, and I do have to go, is we ended up doing a wrapper. So as we had these different architectures, we kind of created our own little box that we can control, our customer object, and then we could plug and play things easier. So, and I don't see that here in this framework. in the experimentation, the culture experimentation, I would put higher up in the framework than down towards the end. But any case, I really appreciate the insight. But and I'll keep thinking.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and you've got me thinking and rethinking. I don't work at scales anymore where I can, be part of implementing all of this. But I am working on much smaller scaled items, like trying to help a food bank improve their food flow processes. And I see plenty of stealable things here that we can take back to them and have them try. Are we ever going to have a small food bank operating at the level of a DoD project? No, but can we bring some of these things into practice? Yeah, I think so. We're lucky in that we have really good client-side sponsorship from the top down and the bottom up, which I think is the hidden choke point on all of this. Because if you don't have that sponsorship and you're trying to do this, it's going to be a very hard lift.
Concur. It's in my opinion, it's impossible.
Oh, thank you, because I was trying to nicely say that.
Right.
I was using the terms they taught me in consulting boot camp.
Right. It's I experienced, like I was saying, I've been looking for a home in the right organization. Thank you very much, Dirk. Thank you. And someone asked if I'm familiar with Cinefin as a complexity theory model. No, I'm not, but I definitely want to be. But we're going back to what we were just saying. If the organization doesn't facilitate learning, if it doesn't facilitate psychological, if you don't have psychological safety, you have nothing. You don't have attention, you don't have learning, you don't have information, you don't even know what's really going on. And if you have an organization that is allowing a bully to run rampant, you're not DevOps, you're not agile, and eventually you will lose to someone that is, unless you're working within a particularly isolated environment that's shielded from the marketplace. But even then, it's coming. It's coming eventually.
Even EJ, this is Bob. I'm the one that asked the question about Kinefin, and I think this is the nature of wicked problems. You're right. Steve refers to them as wicked problems in messy spaces, right? And the reality is we cannot harness the entire problem. It's not possible, right? By the very definition of being a complex wicked problem. But what we do is gather data, test, right? And then develop our theories and look retroactively. So that's kind of the Kinefin model, is that when you get in complex environments, they're not possible. So you probe, you sense, and you respond, as opposed to bringing a theory to the problem, right? And then applying it. Here you're gathering data and acting iteratively. So yeah. I think it aligns with what you've presented.
And I think part of the problem here is getting access to boards of advocates in DC beltways. The folks that big DoD firms are calling on when they need someone at the drop of a hat to testify in front of a congressional committee. And being able to get the message out and start getting the buy-in, so that you start seeing RFPs that actually reflect a current state of affairs rather than the state of affairs that existed 10 years ago when the budgeting cycle for the RFP project started. I've always been amazed at how out of sync DoD RFPs can be with actual practice in our profession.
And one of the things so I just finished a project in 2020, working with a government customer, where I had the great privilege of serving as a a technical advisor on a technical evaluation team for the acquisition process itself. I was able to help write the RFP and do the market research. That's why I went to ITSEC. I mentioned ITSEC earlier. That's why I was able to go to ITSEC and was conducting market research for that particular major systems, well, a portion of the major systems acquisition that the Coast Guard was undertaking. And I saw firsthand the enormous problems that are encountered when you're using the tools of the FAR and you're using the tools of traditional contract management. The tools themselves constrain you from being able to get what you need. It's like you keep on tripping over your own feet, trying to, even if you have the great fortune of knowing what you need, you can't truly get there. And there are all sorts of compromises that had to be made along the way, largely driven by the requirements of legal contract management, federal acquisitions regulations. And currently, I believe that contract management is, if not the most, the heaviest constraint, it's certainly up there. And I think that's why the Air Force is doing a great job in, having, I forgot what they call them, but interacting with industry in a way that doesn't quite bypass FAR, but it adheres to the thoughts of encouraging. The heart of the FAR is supposed to encourage innovation. And right now, as we know, it does anything but. So the Air Force, I think, is doing the best job out of all the armed services. And the Department of Homeland Security had a great, they have this innovation procurement lab, or procurement innovation lab, or PIL. And it was filled with all sorts of wonderful innovations that expedited these processes in pretty amazing ways.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, nice meeting you, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for your feedback. I'm very encouraged.
Sound likewise. Thanks, Babs.
Thank you. You all take care.
You too. Thank you.
Mhm. EJ, that was wonderful.
Awesome. Awesome.
And I'm gonna get Bob. You can go ahead and stop recording, and we will send this out